I want to talk a little bit about step instructions because you might be wanting to generate printed step instructions for your cast. Uh, Previously we talked about on the options for your field how you have the ability to define your lines and your field dimensions, and we talked about these presets. You see these radio buttons over here that let you choose certain standard sizes, and this works hand in hand with the field steps, the step instructions, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. We have a show here that it's sort of a simple basic show. If you go to options for step instructions, you see on here all these reference points. The step instructions, when you generate step instructions for an individual, will be telling where they are in relation to a certain landmark on the field. And these are the standard landmarks that are predefined, but you can change these if you want to. You have a visitor sideline, a visitor hash, a right goal line. All of your yard lines and hash marks and sidelines and end lines are all on here. And you can actually delete these. If you select one of these, you can actually delete them. You can add different ones, and you can change these. Notice that some of these say vertical and some say horizontal. A sideline is horizontal because it goes from side to side. Obviously the yard lines are vertical. You can change these. These have a name. You can change what you're calling it. If you don't, this name will appear on your step instructions. If you don't want it to be called right 30-yard line, you can just change it to 30-yard line or something else. This offset is in inches. This works a little like the field options in that you can change the units that you're using here. This is obviously vertical. We don't want to change it to horizontal, but if you were adding a new one, you could choose vertical or horizontal. Notice that when you're using vertical, you get a display label, and here's why. These labels that you see on the field, these are actually labels that go along with your landmarks. 10, 20, 30, 40. These are landmarks or reference points on your step instructions. So on these, you see that you have a name, left 40-yard line. That's the name, but it also has a display label. The display label is 40. You could change that label if you wanted to. Other things that you have here, these offset units, these are just allowing you to see in your list what the offsets are. The offset is based on where it is on the field. In other words, that's giving a location. If you have a landmark, you have to know where it is on the field. The sideline is 0 because it's considered at the top. It's 0 from the top here. Maybe I should show how step instructions are generated. If you right click on a cast member and hit step instructions, you get a list something like this, and on my computer it comes up in WordPad. On your computer it may come up in Microsoft Word or some other program. So you then have a document that you can go ahead and edit. You can type in this document. You can type in comments if you want to. You can erase things. You can add notes, and then you can print it out. In this case, printing from WordPad or printing from Microsoft Document. So this is telling who the person is. We haven't entered a name for this person, but it tells their section, what their instrument is, and on step 0, where are they going to be. The formation, the location from side to side. Notice this 50-yard line, that's because that's the nearest marker. So the nearest reference point where they would be. It's always going to give it in relation to the nearest reference point. And in a front back, you get the side to side and front to back. And again, 6.8 steps above the visitor hash, that's the nearest reference point. And notice that it gives this offset in steps. and then it's going to give all the locations onto the end of the show. The reason I bring it up about the offsets being in steps is that you can change that. This offset units, usually most people want this in steps, but you can have it in inches. So if we gave this in inches, just for the sake of argument, let's change it to inches, hit OK. Now we've changed our options for step instructions. Now if you actually generate the step instructions for that person, now you see that these offsets are given in inches. Inches from this, inches from that. 176 inches below the visitor sideline. You get to choose your offsets. If you choose more than one person, you can actually go up here to cast, show step instructions. Now you're going to get 3 sets of step instructions. Step instructions for this person, step instructions for the second person, step instructions for the third person. They're all in one document here because we chose 3 people. Now another thing I wanted to demonstrate about the step instructions, these landmarks here, these reference points go with your standard football field. So if you really wanted to do another field size, say if you wanted to do a color guard, you know that we have over here on the options for field, we have these presets. So say if we're going to change this to indoor guard 70 by 50. It's a standard size. It's one standard size. Now we've changed our field, but our step instructions, we're going to have to change the reference points too, because if we don't, they're not going to match. So you'd have to go over here to step instructions. How do you change all of these without manually entering them? You go to defaults. This is important. Defaults you get to choose. Indoor guard 70 by 50, that's your default. Now you're going to lose all of these in the list, and it warns you about that. Now what it's done, it's blown away all the reference points we had, and it's replaced them with these. Now on this particular field we only get a visitor sideline, a right sideline, a left sideline, and a home sideline. So we basically have we have 2 horizontal, that's our front and back lines, and then we get the two either sides. So these are the reference points that it's going to give for a show. And if you want to add another one, you can add another one. Let's just say, for instance, we know that we're given these in feet. We know that this is 70 by 50. What if we want to enter a center line? So let's just let's give it a name. We'll call it center line. Now we're given the offset in feet, so let's check feet. We know that this is 70 across, so we know that we have one at 0, we have one at we have one at 0 left, 70 is right, so let's, in our middle, let's make 35 feet the center line, and it's a vertical one that we're making. So let's give it a display label, and let's just call it center 35. That's the way it's going to display on the field. And OK, and now you have that. And sure enough, there's your display label. And this is going to be used on your step instructions. So if we just generate a small show here, let's just add a couple of cast members, and let's just this is a very small field, so the cast members appear larger. Let's make just a simple transition. Now you see that we have a transition here. Now if we generate steps, choose our person pointer, right click on him, get step instructions. Now we see that the offsets are given in inches because we chose inches, and the reference points are the reference points that are in our list. And by the way, if you don't like the names of these reference points, again, step instructions, you can change these. You could either select this and hit change to change it, or you could double click on it to change it. So if I didn't like visitor sideline, I could change that to say, I don't know, top edge. You can call it anything you want. We'll call this top edge because it really is the top. Home sideline, we'll just call this bottom edge. And you can change the names of all of these if you want to. The display labels you only get for the vertical marks. In other words, that's because the display labels are along the bottom here. Where you would usually see your yard lines, those are display labels. That's why you don't get display labels running along here. That's why you're not really allowed to enter display labels. And if we make this horizontal, you see sure enough the display label goes away. So we'll talk more about step instructions, but the main point I wanted to make, if you're going to use an alternate field size, that is if you're going to go over to your field, choose one of these alternate sizes, or otherwise enter a custom size, then you have to go over to your step instructions. If you want them to match, either hit defaults, choose one of the regulation sizes, or you can actually manually go in and change all of these reference points. You can actually type in feet or steps or whatever offset you want. If you want it to make your field 75 wide, then you can make it 75 wide, but to make your step instructions match, you also have to change your offset for this reference point to also be 75. It's a little tedious, but now you've seen it, you can work with how you can set it up. The rest of these things are pretty simple. I've already showed you this. This is how your position offset units are expressed in your step instructions that you generate. This is an option, lets you show the index. In other words, it'll say you're person number 1 in this form, number 2, number 3. If you don't check that, it won't tell them that. If you check this, it's going to tell them who their neighbor is. So if they don't know who to line up next to, if they want to check that they're in the right place, they can look over there and see that Harry's next to them and Sally's on the other side. You have that option in your step instructions. Show spacing will tell them what their exact spacing is on that form. Again, it's an option you have. Step size will tell them when they're going from one to the next. Let me just check all of these and sort of show you how they work. Let's just hit OK, and we're in this format. By the way, these are the wording formats, and I'll show you what that means. Let's look at the step instructions again. This is telling you who your neighbors are. Remember, we checked that option. This is telling you your step size. This is the step size that you came from the previous maneuver to go to this maneuver, and it's telling them that their step size is a 14.2 step size. It might not always be the same. If you're using maneuvers in which not everyone has the same step sizes. Some people are taking small step sizes, larger step sizes. This is always telling them their front to back, their location side to side. This is saying who their neighbors are. Notice it says no first name, no last name. You can give every cast member an exact name. You can put their actual name in there. I'll show you how to do that. The index on the form, this person happens to be 0 because it starts from 0. If I chose this, step instructions, notice that he has an index of 3 because that's his order, his placement on the form. And then we have a space for comments on these. And the last thing I want to show you on the step instructions is this format. You can change these. There are only 3 that I provide: front, back, side to side. A lot of people will want. You can use inside, outside, which is a slightly different wording. And if you experiment with that, you'll see how it works. This they're saying outside the center line, above the bottom edge. It's just a different way of wording it that some people may find better, some people may find worse. You basically have 3. But when you hit step instructions, it brings it up. Again, here it's in WordPad. On yours, it might be we'll talk about how printing works. You depending on which one you choose. In other words, I chose a file type of .doc, which on my computer brings up WordPad. On yours, it might bring up Microsoft Word. If you choose .text, it may bring up a different type. On my computer, it happens to bring up Notepad. On your computer, it may bring up something different. But it's going to depend on what programs are on your computer. And then from there, you can print. And you can, in fact, edit this and do anything you want to it. So I hope that gives you a pretty good starting point for step instructions. I talked about everything that's on here. The only thing I didn't talk about is you can change your label color from here. So if you actually go in and change this label color to red, you can actually change the font too. And then on your field, you'll find that the font has changed. So I think that's enough about step instructions for now. Later on, we'll talk about printing in general. Basically, one thing to point out is that if you want to print the step instructions for people, you have to select the people, then go to print. This is another way to show it. These are many things you can print. One of them is step instructions. And then if you hit OK, it's going to print those. Again, prints them into a document. It doesn't send them to your printer. It gives you a document you can edit. Then you hit print, and then you print it. So I think that's enough for now. The basic takeaway from that is your step instructions have these reference points that you have to define if you're going to change your field size. That's the main thing you want to know. Otherwise, they're not going to make any sense at all when you change your field size. So make sure that these match up. Use your defaults, choose a preset, or edit these manually, and you should have usable step instructions that you can print and generate. And I think I'll cover some more about that in a different lesson. This is getting 17 minutes. That's a pretty long video for us. Most of them run about 10 minutes. So I think I'll just stop right there.